Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghayril maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين، أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قالت لهم رسلهم إن نحن إلا بشر مثلكم ولكن الله يمن على من يشاء من عباده وما كان لنا أن نأتيكم بسلطان إلا بإذن الله وعلى الله فيتوكل المؤمنون. صدق الله علي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I give my condolences to each of you on the occasion which we have come to commemorate, and that is the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, his companions, and his Ahlul Bayt alayhim wa afdalu salatu wassalam. As we begin from the start of Muharram, a discussion about the mission of Imam Hussein. What exactly was the mission of Imam Hussein? What was he trying to accomplish? We mentioned that the initial, or at least one of the greatest missions that he had, from his own statement and his own words, that he is leaving from Medina to Mecca, or he's leaving from Medina, which will eventually take him to Karbala to correct the ummah of Rasulullah, to do amr bil ma'ruf wa nahya anil munkar, to enjoin the good and to forbid that which is wrong. This was one aspect or one dimension of the mission of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. We also spoke extensively about the other dimensions of this particular mission. One was to establish, or at least to present to the believers, to present to the Muslims, the Ummah in its entirety, the correct idea and concept of leadership. For the idea of leadership is something that no community, no nation can go without. The idea and concept of leadership was such that the Prophet, he stated, whoever does not recognize, whoever does not follow the leadership after me, and this is something that is in the books and the texts of all Muslims, no matter what their theological inclination may be, says whoever does not follow that leader or know that leader, then they have died the death of Jahiliyyah, as if they did not understand the mission of the Prophet himself. So Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, one of his missions was to present the correct notion and idea about leadership. That was his idea, or the reason for which he rose, or the principles for which he stood for as a leader. Were they equal to the principles of the caliph at the time who had been appointed? And that was Yazid. So which of the two forms or principles of leadership was the correct form? So Imam Hussein, he stood, and this was one of his goals, or at least one of his missions. And this was a mission that we had mentioned from the very beginning as one of the aspects of prophethood. Because in theory, those who came to lead the ummah or stepped in the place of leadership, that one of their objectives was to lead the ummah, to assume, at least in some aspect or form, the duties or part of the duties that the Prophet had. And that was to guide the ummah, to keep the ummah together, to keep the ummah organized, to keep them on the path which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had designated for the ummah. To keep them on the path of the final revelation which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed to his Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is captured in the discussion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the discourse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents to us in Surah Al-Ibrahim, and even the doubts that some had with regards to the prophets, and they stated in response, قالت لهم رسلهم إن نحن إلا بشر مثلكم ولكن الله يمن على من يشاء من عباده. That yes, while the prophets share in their humanity like any other human being, however, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them. He has blessed them with a certain gift, with a certain blessing. And by that blessing, and because on one hand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delegated them, and on the other hand they have earned that particular position and delegation, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appointed them. Last night we spoke about at least the dimension that the Prophet had earned. And so one who assumes the correct status of leadership after Prophet, they also must walk in that footsteps. And that position is a position of ubudiyyah, of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That on one hand, the Prophet rose, and particularly the ulul azm, as we spoke about, they rose to a station of servitude with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected them. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks in the Quran, وَاصْطَفَاهُمْ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has selected them, has appointed them, has delegated them. But this is because they were exemplary in their worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that opened up for us another dimension of the mission of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, and that is to be an exemplary servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to exemplify what it means to be a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we all say, Muslims, again, despite the different theological inclinations, we say that the highest state of the Prophet was him being a servant of Allah. And this is why we say in our tashahhud, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So in our prayers, we highlight the fact of his ubudiyyah. And then we highlight the fact of his messengership. Because he was a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he had risen to that state of servitude, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delegated him as his prophet. And because those individuals, even among the prophets, who again went through greater tasks and tests, and they surmounted those tests, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them the position of imamat. As he did with the Prophet Ibrahim, as he did with the Prophet Nuh, as he did with the Prophet Isa, Musa, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But first they were exemplary servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they rose to this station. We say that one who rises to that station and acquires the imamat even if they don't have the station of Nabuwat or Risalat, they are not a prophet, nor are they a messenger by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they have that position of imamat, then they too have risen to a station where they are exemplary servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that was one of the missions of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, to exemplify the servitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why when we see and we look at Karbala and what happened in Karbala, that even as the war was being waged and the battle was continuing, Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he established a prayer in the midst of the battle of Karbala. That while arrows and spears were being thrust at him, he continued the salat. And this is the highest form of ibadah. This is something that Imam Hussein alayhi wasallam, he wanted to get across to, again, the ummah, humanity. That no matter what happens, we must remain the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if you want to be the highest station in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the perspective of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have to be the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this definitely should make us reflect upon our servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and sometimes the excuses that we give ourselves for not serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we should. Because Imam Hussein, he was the example. This was one of his missions in his journey to Karbala. Another one of his missions that we can understand, particularly from verse 11 of Surah Ibrahim, that is chapter 14, verse 11. As we use this as from the beginning, we selected this verse, the previous verse, and this verse to examine the plight of Imam Hussein, whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he states that he has blessed certain servants over others because of their state of ubudiyyah. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَمُنَّ عَلَى مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. That Allah, he blesses certain of his servants. And then he states that these servants, وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. This is another trait which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he describes these servants by. That they are those who depend and they rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They put their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a quality, again, by examining the plight of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, that we see that he is exemplary in this trait. That how he puts his faith and his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in order to understand this better, then we must understand this idea of tawakkul. What exactly is tawakkul? What exactly is this idea of putting one's trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One of our great scholars, Allama Tabatabai, who has written the tafsir, the famous tafsir Al-Mizan, he has a discourse, a discussion about tawakkul, so that we may understand the dimensions and the aspects of tawakkul. He says that tawakkul, reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is at its root, at its core, is will. That a person wills or they desire to do something, to achieve or to accomplish something. But in order to accomplish that thing, there are a few things that must be in place. And so Allama Tabatabai, he states that there are two types of things that must be in place in order for a person to accomplish a thing or a goal which he or she has set out to accomplish. He said, on one hand, there must be asbab tabi'iyya. There must be at least a relatively certain materialistic and physical things that must exist. To give an example, if a person intends to, let's say, travel from America to Mecca to make Hajj, then he needs to have the means to do so, meaning that he must have some sort of vehicle, a plane, must have money to do so, to buy a ticket. So all of these things are things which are tangible, which are material, which are something that in this world we have to make sure that these things are in place. Or even if we are just planning to drive to the next city or go to the next city, in order to get there, we have to have the material means to make that journey. So that's one thing that must be in place, as Allama Tabatabai says. He says, a second thing that must be in place, he says, this is asbab ruhiyya. And these are non-material or spiritual or metaphysical things that must be in place in order to accomplish and achieve that goal. And he gives examples of this. What are these things that must be in place, that one must have? He says, on one hand, the continuity of the will, of one's willpower. So if one desires to achieve something, but at some point, the desire to achieve that thing has become faint in that individual, or they've lost the desire. He says, and no matter if they have the material means, they have a car, they've bought the ticket to go to Hajj, they have the money, but they've lost the desire to accomplish that thing. He says, then that thing will not be achieved. Or if one has, again, the example he gives, he says, if one begins to have su'u dhann, begin to think negatively, that, well, if I take this journey, and sometimes we find people like that they may want to accomplish something, but then before they even begin to start that thing, as we say, they psych their own selves out. They say, oh, it's too difficult, it's too hard, I can't do it for this reason, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Because of all of these things, perhaps someone will do this, perhaps this will happen. Oh, it's impossible to accomplish. Because they're negative thinking. So Allah says, so that's asbab ruhiyya, or at least the metaphysical, or if you want to call it, the spiritual, intellectual, or whatever you want to call it. It's not something tangible, but it's something that is metaphysical. It's something dealing with the psyche, something dealing with the spirit, to want to achieve that goal as well. He says, then this must also be there. And so he says that tawakkul, reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says it also falls within that category. Among the spiritual and the metaphysical causes or reasons which will aid a person to achieve and to accomplish his or her goals. So he says this is what tawakkul is. And without that, again, especially for someone who's a believer, someone who's a mu'min, that he says without that tawakkul, he says then there's no certainty in the success of one's action. And the value actually of that action that one undertakes without tawakkul, he says, then it does not have the same value. In other words, he's not denying that, yes, maybe a person is oblivious of the idea of tawakkul, and they go forth to achieve something, they maintain their, I guess, willpower to do that thing, and perhaps they may accomplish it. He says, but if you want to accomplish it in the best of manners, and move forward to accomplish that thing, he says, then you do it with tawakkul. Because tawakkul, reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, will actually strengthen that metaphysical and spiritual and intellectual aspect that is needed in order to accomplish a goal, what you've set out to do. Then he refers back and this is a discussion, to the Quran itself. What does the Quran state about tawakkul? That we know that tawakkul is this dimension, this reliance and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will help us, it will aid us in accomplishing our goal and our mission in life. It is that which Imam Hussein alayhi wasalam, that he himself he relied upon. When we look at the will, the wasiyah that he gave to his brother before leaving Medina, Muhammad al-Hanafiyyah, what he told to Muhammad al-Hanafiyyah, he stated that he relies upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that his success, tawakkal, he says, وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ وَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ وَإِلَيْهِ أُنِيبُ. He says, my success in my journey, and again we're going to come back to this idea too, because we need to understand what was Imam Hussein's journey. We know the way it ended, but look at the way he's beginning this journey. He says, my success, because he has a mission. And that mission, as he claims, he says, Amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy al munkar. He says, my success and my mission, he says, it is only by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the tawfiq, the success of this mission, ma tawfiqi illa billah, is only by the will of God. Wa alayhi tawakkaltu, and upon God I have put my trust so that that mission will be successful. This is what he says at the beginning of the journey. And throughout the journey, he again refers to this idea and this concept of tawakkul. And even at the very end, he refers to this. So why is someone like Imam Hussein relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why did he put so much trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is it about tawakkul that is one of the most critical and pivotal points of the mission of Imam Hussein? Not only the mission of Imam Hussein, but that of the prophets in their entirety. That when they responded to those who doubted in their mission, one of the things that it said, وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَمُنَّ عَلَى مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He blesses whomever He wills from His servants. وَمَا كَانَ لَنَا أَن نَأْتِيكُمْ بِسُلْطَانٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And it is not such that the prophets, they will come with an authority, whether that authority be of miracles, or whether that authority be of political and social stature, that it is not for them to bring that except for by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we rely, or at least the believers, they rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So tawakkul is at the heart of the mission of all of the prophets. It is at the heart of the mission of all of the imams. It is at the heart of the mission of Imam Hussein alayhi wasalam. So what is it about this tawakkul? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala